Chennai, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm sorry I'm a bit late.
No, it's fine. You're on time.
Greetings to you all. Mikael, put me the video on. Good evening. Greetings to you all who are joining us in this 7th session of the Surplus Trust Policy Dialogue Forum on Zoom. Today we're looking at a very important topic. We're turning to the economy in Zimbabwe, the difference between rhetoric and reality, a debate on the future of the Zimdollar, the soaring prices, rising inflation, and the economic situation in general. We have a panel of experts. I'll be introducing our chair, our moderator today, Janet Jo, but I just want to make the point that we had hoped to have CZI, the Confederation of Zimbabwe Industries, on this panel, since it was them who torched the storm recently on this subject. But regrettably, they feel they're unable to participate. They feel that they may jeopardize the dialogue that's taking place between them and the government on this subject. It's a great pity that having made the statement they made, as CZI a week ago, they are unable to come and field the same statement for the purpose of this discussion. However, we have a panel will be introduced by Janet shortly, and we have deliberately brought Caleb Fundanga, a former governor of the Reserve Bank of Zambia, during the Manawasa times, during which period the Zambians who had similar problems to ourselves with respect to the currency were able to stabilize the Zambian kwacha, which remains very strong. And I was in Zambia last week. There's no running after the US dollar at all. I didn't even see a US dollar while I was in Zambia. The kwacha is a tradable quantity in its own right. And we'd like to hear from the Zambian president how they went about it. We had some 2 years ago occasion to bring in Caleb Fundanga again to try and give us a background to the Zambian experience. And now he's also on the board of RBZ, and we're hoping that the Zambian president can continue to inform us as we struggle with the same problem that we had in 2006, 2008. We have also brought in Chris Mchangwa. Yes, he's a spokesperson for ZANU-PF, but on this occasion, he's coming in as a professional in his own right, with some views and observations on this subject. So with that, I want to introduce Janet Jo, who has been a regular on our policy dialogues. She's on ZimCode, prominent economist, activist. Janet, please take over.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you everyone who has managed to join in on this very important and topical conversation that we are having today on the currency crisis, such a protracted crisis that we have had as Zimbabwe. And this conversation is coming following the celebrations. May is the Workers' Month because we celebrate the Workers' Day on the 1st of May 2022. We actually, across the country, commemorated this year's Workers' Day, with workers really celebrating it in agony as prices of basic goods in shops were beyond and continue to be beyond the reach of the working class, leaving as well the marginalized communities in rural areas suffering as well. We are talking about the currency crisis, while the nation is also braced for a poor cropping season as a result of the erratic rainfall patterns that have been received across the country, domestic food shortages coupled with rising global prices as the war in Eastern Europe between Ukraine and Russia continues to severely disrupt global food supply chains and fueling an astronomical increase in domestic food prices, fuel prices, thus plunging many citizens into food poverty. As we are going to have this discussion as well today, the IMF estimates that about a third of Zimbabwe's population are faced with food insecurity in 2022. The government of Zimbabwe has failed to provide adequate social safety nets and deliver quality and affordable public services, which has left vulnerable groups exposed to the tightening macroeconomic environment. We are also having this discussion this week as the schools have opened, the education calendar reopened this week with many public schools, colleges and universities hiking tuition fees, even though workers' salaries are lagging behind in Zimbabwe dollar because of the exchange rate depreciation against the greenback, thereby elevating price inflation. We also saw as schools opened, the prices of school uniforms, stationery, and extra lessons are rising. All these trigger inequalities, upscaling of school dropout rates, particularly for children from underprivileged families. The situation is the same in the public healthcare. As a result of the current currency crisis and inflation crisis facing the nation, public hospitals and clinics are facing such an acute medical drug shortages and equipment, thereby subjecting actually many citizens to hefty prices that are being charged by the private healthcare providers, which are the alternative for the citizens who have the US dollar or are depending on the diaspora remittances. So when we are talking about stabilizing the macroeconomy, some economic analysts are calling for us to go back to 2009, the option of dollarizing that killed the Zimbabwe dollar and instantly stopped the global record hyperinflation for any country that is in peacetime. They are arguing, for those that are arguing for the re-dollarization, that will attain the same, and that by using a strong US dollar, the country will get exchange rate stability, which is key to the attainment of nationally desired low price growth. This will be a milestone achievement in the fight against the rising poverty levels and the widening inequality gaps and the high unemployment rates that we are currently witnessing, and also the massive depreciation and skyrocketing of prices and inflation in Zimbabwe. We will no longer have the creation of currently the groups of the haves, who are those with the strong US dollar, and the have-nots, those with the fragile Zimbabwe dollar or the RTGS. The poor majority spend most of their incomes on current consumption. Hence, if maybe we dollarize, according to some economic analysts, adequate financing for requirements, saving for future consumption would then be attained if we have or we come back to the US dollar. This will subdue as well the social safety net burden that the government or the fiscus is currently witnessing, as we will reduce the vulnerable groups like the needy elderly, those that are unemployed, the youth, people with disabilities. And this will also increase savings. So a stable macroeconomic economy will attract investment, foreign and direct and domestic, thus creating more employment and other factors of production. So these economists are pushing that we go back to 2009. But we also have some economic commentators that have been against the re-dollarization, including the government, as they posit that this will plunge Zimbabwe into a supermarket economy with shelves dominated by imported goods. Official statistics show that between 2009 and 2018, the dollarization period, if you remember, Zimbabwe experienced an unsustainable average trade deficit of US 2.5 billion per year. This was so because of using the strong US dollar. Goods produced in other countries with weaker currencies became cheaper in the eyes of the locals, while locally produced goods became expensive in the eyes of the foreigners holding weaker currencies. So this threatens the existence of the local industry by rendering local companies regionally uncompetitive, lowering their output and profitability, thereby maybe increasing unemployment. So these are some of the arguments that are for those that are against the dollarization. And the question is, what then needs to be done to move to a stable economy? Can we continue in the current dual pricing system that is dominated by a fragile Zimbabwe dollar, which is deteriorating at the speed of lightning, causing unbearable inflation and stinking poverty and inequality? If yes, then what is driving this currency depreciation, since fundamentals are sound as posited by government? And what can be done to ensure that the Zimbabwe dollar reclaims its lost value against the United States dollar? Or can we dump the local currency and use the US dollar as a sole legal tender to attain a quick macroeconomic recovery, just as the country did in 2009? So this is the discussion that we are going to have today. And I have an esteemed expert panel that is going to unpack this issue. We want to find out whether this is just rhetoric or it's actually something that is actionable, that is in the interest of citizens, that is in the interest of the workers, that is in the interest of the Zimbabweans, so that we move forward with an economy that we are building together that is stronger and that delivers for everyone. So to kickstart us off, we have Tinashe Murapata, who is the CEO and founder of Leon Africa. Tinashe is the CEO of this investment holding company. And before this, he has worked in London for Barclays Bank. He has extensive economic research experience as an economist, as a banker, covering numerous developing countries in Africa, and continues this research under XDS Zimbabwe. He was educated at UZ in Harare, Wits Business School in Johannesburg, and HEC in Paris. He's currently enrolled in the Global Executive MBA, hosted by Triumph, New York University, LSE, and HEC. Tinashe has got an interest in rebuilding Zimbabwe. He speaks to higher level macroeconomic issues and the issue of the currency as one of the fundamentals for macroeconomic stability is of interest and passion to him. So at this point, he's the one who will give us a presentation on the current debates and the perspectives around the currency crisis and what Zimbabwe has to do in order to achieve the macroeconomic stability. So at this point in time, I will hand over to our presenter, who will present for about 15 to 20 minutes before we call upon our discussants that I will introduce as we go. Thank you, and Tinashe, I give you the mic.
Thank you very much, Janet. I hope everybody can hear me loud and clearly. Thank you very much for SAPers for this platform. And I hope that I'll be able to share my few thoughts on where we are. Is it rhetoric? What is the reality? And looking at the Zimdollar, looking at dollarization, dual currency, and a lot that's actually happening in our country. I suppose the news or the threat of a monocurrency is one that has everybody worried. Is there a reason to worry, or is this to be expected? I attended a strategy session on Zimbabwe the last week, and that's the anecdote I want to start off with. That somebody sort of asked, how would you explain the Zimbabwean environment? And almost everybody said there is extreme volatility and uncertainty. And one guy thought that's not true, said Zimbabwe is very predictable. So it's not exactly volatile, nor is it uncertain what is going to happen. It's just that we do not like what is going to happen, but it's always going one way and not the other way. So that's not the definition of volatility. The definition of volatility means that it's swinging up and down. As far as the Zimbabwean story is concerned, it's heading one way, and it has been heading one way for a very long time. And that's what I sort of want to give. So I want to give the reality so that we move away from speaking in theory or theorizing, and we stick to the reality. It is very sobering. The reality is very sobering, but it is also empowering, because when you're empowered, you know exactly what to expect. So what I'll do is I will share my presentation. I don't know if I'm allowed to share. Okay.
Yeah, you're sharing.
All right, fantastic. And everybody can see it?
Yeah,
Don't
we can
worry.
see.
Tinashe, you can go ahead.
Okay. Fantastic. This is the only graph that I will share. So don't worry, it's not going to be too long, but I'll speak to what it's actually showing you. There's certain fundamentals and certain realities. So for us to speak about what's happening in 2022, it's perhaps better to start with what happened in 1980, and I sort of divided it in 3 decades. And I will explain what you're seeing there. Unfortunately, because our numbers move from 1 to as high as 100 trillion, one has to log base the x's. This is just so that we can that's required, because the numbers get so astronomical that you can't fit them in a PowerPoint presentation. So I've logged it just for illustration purposes. But the key thing is, if you woke up today and you walk into any country and they told you that the inflation rate for the last decade was 13%, that the average inflation rate for 10 years was 13%, anyone would consider that as high inflation. You can see what's happening in America at the moment, where inflation is at 8.5%, and it's a big worry. Now imagine going for an entire decade where the average inflation is 13%. That's actually considered high inflation. Now I say this because there's a revisionism about this first decade of Zimbabwe. That's not so. If you look at the first decade of Zimbabwe, CPI was averaging 13%. That's for an entire decade. Money supply was increasing, and it ended 1990 at 7.2 billion. Government debt increased from 1 to 6.7 billion dollars. That was the reality in 1980 for the first decade, 1980 to 1990. And that is not a stable environment. This was the first decade. We continue with the second decade, and you see the average inflation actually doubles from 13% to 28%, right? And money supply does a tizzy, and it continues to increase. Government debt, pushed by government debt, government borrowings. You can see government borrowings is increasing. So that was like the second decade. So the first 20 years of operating in Zimbabwe, from a business or from individual perspective, the economy, you can see that it is a high inflation environment. You cannot consider it a low inflation. It's a high inflation environment where if your average CPI is 13%, interest rates were higher than that. We're around 15, 16% for a decade. And then it moves to 28%. That's the average for between 1991 and 2000. But something significant happens in 1991 to 2000. I would like to correct a misnomer that the problem started in 1997, 98, and 2000. It's actually where we see the problem. It happens in 1995, where government debt increased by $2.3 billion in just 1 year. And half of that was offshore borrowings, and the other half was domestic borrowings in just 1 year. That is probably what precipitated the crisis that then landed itself in 1997 and 1998. But you can see government borrowings is the core. Government has been continuously borrowing and inflating the money supply since 1980. Now, obviously, 1995 was an election year, and that could be the cause. But it was extraordinary in 1995. We saw 1990, in 1985, 1990, we had elections, but not to the extent that 1995 changed things. And I sort of asked political scientists if it was anything extraordinary around 1995, especially in the election year, why government would borrow as much. And the best answer I could get was this was at the tail end of ISAP, where a lot of people had been retrenched, and government was worried, and government was panicking, and they had to perhaps spend more. There's also the issue of a drought. So it was not as severe as the 1992 drought, but it was equally severe. The other reason was Chizero, the minister at that time, fell ill and resigned. So, that combination led to that increase in 1 year of $2.3 billion. I say this because if you fast forward, 25 years later, and you see command agriculture, and you see all these government expenditure, it shouldn't surprise us. And I think that's the big worry that I have with programs, is that we keep worried, surprised about the government's actions when it's very clear this has been the modus operandi since 1980. Shouldn't surprise us at all. We've never operated in a stable environment since 1980. That's what this is showing us. 2001 to 2010, that decade is, in calculating the average inflation there, I call it the height of madness. So this is where we get to the second highest hyperinflation in history, in human history. So it's crazy. And that's when something fundamentally changes in the Zimbabwe story. And I say something fundamentally changed in the Zimbabwe story because I will speak to it again in 2021. But, and perhaps people like Igbo could help us here. In 1980, 1990, a lot of Zimbabweans would have kept their money in the bank, although it was being eroded by inflation. Inflation of 28%, the money was being eroded. But I don't think people were as worried. They thought, or they remained very hopeful, but unfortunately they didn't have the means to defend themselves against hyperinflation. So a lot of wealth was destroyed in 2008, but it also changed people's mindsets. And so if I were a policymaker, this is the point that they need to be aware of, that what perhaps they could get away with in the first 2 decades, they cannot get away with it going forward. But I call it, the height of madness, where government debt, which had been increasing, which was domestic debt, so there I just used domestic debt, that it went to zero. That's the domestic debt. I highlight this because I want to make the point that the biggest beneficiary of dollarization in 2008 was government itself. It didn't need to pay back the debt, the domestic debt that they've been accumulating over the last 2 decades. The over expenditure that they had been doing was cancelled out by the hyperinflation. Domestic debt reduced to absolutely zero. It means that savings were reduced because TBs are bought. So treasury, the people who hold treasury bills, who lend to government, are actually savers. And government was not going to return money, return any return whatsoever to savers. So government debt reduced to zero. And we had forced dollarization, where the market literally dollarized by itself. And that's why you see inflation coming down, and you see money supply coming down, you see everything. There's some sort of semblance of a genuine low inflation during that period. But obviously no lessons were learned. And we started to see the cycle again. If you just look at the red line, it shows you the sort of cycles that we have in Zim. And while domestic debt was zero, what has happened over the last decade is offshore debt, which you obviously cannot reduce to zero through hyperinflation, has been increasing. So we have a bigger problem in 2022 than we did in 1980. That's number one, because we now have an offshore debt of $20 billion in an economy of around 16, 17 billion dollars, if we're using World Bank numbers. The other big problem that you are finding is that the market itself has changed, has shifted. As I said, in the first decade, if you look at domestic savings or people, they didn't know of the US dollar. They were quite ignorant of defending themselves. But post 2008, Zimbabweans can defend themselves against government borrowings, and they do so by dollarizing, by keeping their money under their mattresses, and by using the dollar. It's a way of showing that they have greater control, and government cannot force people. Of course, those who are being paid in Zimdollars, they are in a difficult position. But for the most part, when you look at the foreign remittances, when you look at anyone who earns US dollar, they actually understand the threat to their wealth, which the people in the first decade did not have that knowledge. Today, people are very much aware. So it's, if you were to give an example, it's like the DRC, that although when they went through the hyperinflation, they are still very much, it's still very much a US dollar economy, because people remember what happened before, and they keep US dollars to defend themselves. And they're very right to defend themselves, because the reality, you can see what's happening with the red line and the blue line, that we're at the beginning of another cycle. Whether this cycle will get to, hyperinflation really is dependent on what the government does. But the government must be now fully aware that the market itself is holding dollars to protect themselves. This cannot happen in 2 decades, but we seem not to be learning. So I think that's what I wanted, that's the thesis I'm making, is Zimbabwe for the last 42 years has never had single-digit inflation over a 10-year period. So you cannot define Zimbabwe as a stable economy. It is high instability, and this instability has been there since the first decade. So obviously, what we now have are coping mechanisms. And I think that one coping mechanism of the high instability is actually the use of the dollar. What do we need to do? Before we start talking about growth and all sorts of things, we need a decade of stability. We've never had that. And I think that when you see the frustration of CZI, it's just business realizing that for the past 42 years, we haven't had stability. And one big issue and one big problem is that when you look around the Fortune 500 companies in the world, in America, you find that a lot more companies have been started, the big companies have been started in the last 20 years. One cannot say the same about Zimbabwe. We're not seeing new companies being started and big companies, primarily because of the instability in our economy. We need to ratify that. There are many ways which we can do so, and I've been on record of recommending a currency board, because this is our big instability. The big instability is around money supply, inflation, and government debt. And what we need to do is to immunize that, to take it away from our macro discourse, macroeconomic discourse. And the currency board just ensures, and it must be underwritten, I would suppose, by SADC, just to ensure that we have some sort of stability for a decade. It will be worth our while to have some sort of stability over a decade. So that is my thesis, and I'm quite happy to dig deeper if anyone has any questions in just explaining the graph that's there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tinashe, for that elaborate presentation. It got me a bit concerned because from where I'm sitting, I've been very comfortable with defining the Zimbabwean economy as a VUCA economy, volatile, unpredictable, complex, ambiguous, uncertain, and all these words. But you indicate that we have been going south since independence, and that is very predictable. And from the graph, we can really see the episodes and the trends and how we have been doing in each of the decades since independence. and where we lost it as well. Maybe from independence, we needed to have that decade of stability, but we got into ESAP, we got into different initiatives and prescriptions to try and boost our economy. But the trend around external and domestic borrowing continued inflating the money supply by the government, and we've heightened this kind of madness, as you have put it. The other issue is around the beneficiary to the dollarization, which is an issue that I would like to call Chennai Mutambasere as she will come in next to also elaborate on, because when we are talking about dollarization, we really want to know who is it going to benefit. Because from Tinashe, he says in 2008, going into 2009, as we dollarized, the government was the biggest beneficiary. We saw the CZI statement from the business. They want dollarization, which means they're going to benefit from the dollarization because it gives them stability, it will secure their profitability, their production, and similar issues. But in the current context as well, I think if you scan in the environment, I believe that the business is also benefiting and maximizing even on the weaker currency, because they're already pricing in US dollars and they're hedging actually their prices. They're putting it way beyond even the black market rates. So they're making, I've seen that some financial statements, some businesses have actually made super profits because of that hedging that they have been doing. So who is going to benefit by dollarizing? I hope that my panel and my discussants, as I will call them now, they'll be able to really as well show us who are the beneficiaries, what is in it for the citizens. We have seen, like I've said, the CZI gave us their statement, the challenges they're facing, and the route that they want the government to take in terms of business interests. But in terms of the citizens' interest, where are we going? So at this point, I would like to invite my dear friend, Chennai Mutambasere. She's a development economist based in the UK, where she's also the vice chair of the governors of UTC at Media City in Salford. She has worked for transformation projects in international banks, in the local government and the legal sector. Chennai is a keen researcher and contributor to economic policy research in Zimbabwe. Actually, when we were having this conversation about this dialogue with Tony, the first person who came to my mind as we were thinking about the panel was Chennai, because we have had these conversations with her around the currency and the need for us to dollarize. And we have agreed, we've disagreed, we've engaged with other friends within the sector, economists, to hear their views about dollarizing. So she came out first because this is a conversation we have had prior in terms of our private conversations. So Chennai, I would like to invite you now to just give us your perspective in this subject and on this topic from a development economist perspective, bring in as well the citizens' perspective, but also your experiences as well in transformation projects and in your public sector, public enterprise, private sector investments and transformation. Where are we going as Zimbabwe, and what should we do when it comes to the currency crisis and the stabilization of our economy? You have heard Tinashe.
Thank you, Janet. And thank you, Tinashe, for your very detailed presentation. It's interesting when you look at the figures and the graphs and what they're telling us. So what I will try to do, Janet, is really, I know that we want to focus on dollarizing within the Zimbabwe economy, or not, as the case might be. But it's important that I highlight, I think, a critical factor to this equation. So I would like to think that, even looking at what the figures that Tinashe was presenting, that the Zimbabwe situation is one of economic paralysis, really. And this type of paralysis, I would say, is of a quadriplegic nature. So what I mean by that is that there are four main pillars that are contributing to this status quo, and have been doing so for time, probably since independence, as we've seen in the presentation, and they operate in tandem. So when we look at fixing only one element, such as, for instance, dollarizing, this would still be inadequate, there may be benefits, but they will be marginal. And over time, we might go back to a situation of disbenefit. And this is why we have had seasons where we did dollarize. And yes, the economy improved, but that was not sustained, because we do have three other limbs, three other pillars that must be addressed in order to bring Zimbabwe to a true, honest path of recovery. And so with that, I would say the first pillar is we have at the moment our expropriation index is very high. Zimbabwe has got a high leakage through the economy. We've got different mechanisms of expropriation, mainly, of course, through corrupt tendencies. I think it's the huge elephant in the room when we come to the Zimbabwe economy is corruption. How much of every productive dollar gained leaks away from the economy via the political elite corrupt tendencies? So, we've had it said that once we have money coming in, whether it's productive through investment, etc., that quite a huge percentage, perhaps even 70%, I mean, I say this hypothetically, is being leaked away from the economy, leaving very little for the majority to spend for public spending on things like health care, on things like water and sanitation, etc., etc. So we need to look at our economic market infrastructure to try and understand how can we plug the gaps. I've spoken in the past about the gaping hole in our pocket. If we cannot address that gaping hole, then it makes little difference what type of currency you have. We've got at the moment a 3-tier system when it comes to foreign exchange currency in Zimbabwe. The interchange auction, which famously leaks 50% every time a dollar is traded through the interchange auction. It was meant to be a price discovery mechanism, but we know sadly that is not the case. It's pegged, and we have called it out several times to say that the loss to the general public of nearly 50% through the interchange auction suggests that this is a huge expropriation factor within Zimbabwe. The central bank in itself, as it engages in quasi-fiscal activity, contributes to expropriation. We've seen the reports that have been produced by Sentry that indicate, I think we lost nearly 280 million in one transaction through Command Agriculture, and so on and so forth. So we must be serious about looking at expropriation and how we can really close that gap even ahead of or within also looking at the currency crisis, which is my second point. So, of course, the multi-currency, we are in a multi-currency quagmire, I would say. We are in this kind of stalemate of the US dollar and the Zimbabwe dollar. The economy, the Zimbabwean economy is very much an import-backed economy. We would import our raw materials even for where we produce locally. We would import, even basic commodities have got some elements of importation. So we're an import-backed economy. And that in itself is a strong case for, at this point in time, retaining the use of the US dollar and actually foregoing use of the Zimbabwe dollar currency, because at the moment we are seeing arbitrage behaviors, because this is what we've got, rent seekers in the economy. And if people can spot that, look, if I do this, if I go and deal on the interchange auction today and then swap over to the private market tomorrow, I'm going to make a killing. Like, people will do it, We've seen the various statutory instruments that have been put, every now and again by the central bank, but the market will behave as the market behaves, People are there, they want to make profit. People want to minimize cost to themselves. Everybody is trying to go across the border at some point to buy even basic commodities. So they will always be, at this point in time, whilst our production is reliant on imports, it makes sense for people to go across borders and to order using foreign currency. Therefore, it makes little sense that we're in this stalemate of a weaker currency and the US dollar currency, and much really to the detriment of the deprived economy. That 1/3, Janet, that you said that will be under the extreme poverty index. They're the ones that are working, being paid their salary in the Zimbabwe dollar. The company that they're working for is managing to get a benefit or a better rate through the interchange auction, But when they want to now go and purchase goods to feed their family, they have to go to the parallel market. And so we have this very weird, awkward, and really uncanny situation where the poor are subsidizing the rich, you know, through these mechanisms such as the interchange auction. So the currency crisis, yes, is definitely something that we need to look at. The other issue that was also raised by Tinashe in his graph was also looking at the public debt. You know, Zimbabwe is in this kind of poverty trap wherein we are really so highly indebted. I think the value of our debt at the moment is something like 68% of GDP. And so we are in this situation where we've got unproductive debt, where we're simply paying interest, we're borrowing, where the projects, you know, I had 5 years before we actually begin the project, before we actually get a return from the project, we are borrowing to subsidize the state-owned enterprises, and yet they should really be running as profitable enterprises. You know, so we've got this situation with public debt that is diverting income away from the economy, away from important public expenditure and public spending. And I mean, we are also seeing wherein we bring in this debt, and I like to quote one particular project where I think we borrowed in 2013 for the DECA project and did not actually begin to start the productivity on it until 2021. So for as long as between 2013 and 2021, we are accruing interest. What are we doing? By the time we start paying off that debt, we are only paying 2.2 million in the first year, and yet we borrowed 48 million. And when you look at the public statement, what it's showing is that some of that money that is borrowed for this specific project is now being used to pay the old debt, to pay off old debt, to also make contributions to state-owned enterprises. So we've got unproductive debt. We are stuck in it. It is contributing to poverty because, again, it diverts resources. The other issue, the other huge elephant in the room is the judicial reform. You know, we have started this current season of government with terms like being open for business. I'm sorry, we cannot open for business if we do not respect or show evidence that we respect property rights. And this has been called out by the World Bank in the last Ease of Doing Business report, that we do have a situation where our judiciary does not stand up to scrutiny when it comes to respect of property rights, when it comes to the timeframes through which you know, cases that are raised against corruption, cases that are raised against contract issues are raised in the courts. It takes such a long time before people can actually get, you know, a response from the judiciary system in terms of those activities. And as long as we are seeing this, we are chasing away investment, the good investment, the investment that is pro-growth, will not be interested in investing in a country with such a huge risk profile when it comes to judicial reform. So we cannot, I say these things because we cannot simply talk about dollarizing, because if we dollarize tomorrow, yes, I believe it would be of benefit to the economy. There would be huge benefits on a macroeconomic scale, because at the moment, our situation with the weaker currency only tends to benefit those that are having the ability to participate in things like interchange auction. And these are the I would hazard to say the very rich, you know, the rich corporates that can participate in interchange auction, etc. They benefit from the arbitrage of having the weaker currency and the stronger currency, and all the activities that we have seen whereby we've got this weak money basically chasing away the good money. So we definitely need to look at dollarizing, but we mustn't do this outside of the other three important factors that I have raised to address expropriation, address judicial reform, address the public debt scenario, and also address the currency crisis. So I would say that without addressing all four, then we are not in a situation where we can actually say, yes, dollarize tomorrow, and things are going to suddenly get better, and that will sustain. So I think I will leave it there for now, Janet. Hopefully I've started to give some indication in terms of, you know, what my perspective is in terms of where we should go. and what things we should be doing to really benefit for the greater good, to retain benefits on a macro scale. I've had people say, let's get back the Zimdollar instead, or let's continue with both. And to be honest, those discussions that I hear are benefiting individuals. They're benefiting those that are already doing okay in this situation. But when we now let's look at how we can move towards better production, how we can move towards better income for the greater good, then for sure, for now, we must dollarize with a view to, once we get to an assured state, we can start to once we have value in our economy, we have value through our industrial sectors, then we can start to say, okay, let's start trading, let's start reintroducing our local currency. Thanks, Janet.
Thank you very much, Chennai. I think this has been elaborate, and when we are looking at our situation, it is multifaceted. The crisis is multifaceted, and it comes at various levels. And you have articulated them very well. And from what you are saying, I think one of the major issues in terms of what you believe is contributing to the currency crisis is not only the exchange itself, but the leakages. How much we are losing of the dollar due to corruption, illicit financial flows, arbitrage, and the like, and without addressing those, and how we have scared away as well investors by taking away the predictability of property rights, how we have also taken away by debt repayments, and if we interrogate these debts, some of them, they lead us to the issues that you have outlined, to corruption. As an example, I think we've seen in Parliament some of the debts under government schemes, like the Command Agriculture, really, the Auditor General's reports, we have seen the rot in some of those schemes, and how the government actually assumed and accrued debts through those schemes. So only the issue of dollarizing is not maybe going to give us the stability or give us the economic recovery that we are looking for. What we need is a holistic approach. We need to put the person at the center, the citizen at the center, the business, issues of property rights and the like. And I think that is very clear. And you kind of, to some extent, also agree with Tinashe that we've been in paralysis for a long time. We haven't moved. I know that Tinashe is saying we've actually been moving, but in the southward trend, but he's saying we haven't moved. We continue to rotate and move around without much progress for the benefit of the citizens, but only maybe for a few individuals who have benefited from the different schemes that have been adopted by the government through policy or through actions. I would not want to continue to summarize your presentation. At this point, I would want to call upon Ambassador Chris Muchangwa, Christopher Atikure Muchangwa, who is a Zimbabwean politician, a diplomat, and a businessman. At a personal level, I know him, inviting him to many of our spaces around the Chinese investments. He's a veteran of the Rhodesian Bush War. Muchangwa has served the government of Zimbabwe, the independent Zimbabwe, under the ZANU-PF party in a number of roles, including as Director General of the Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation, Ambassador to China, Head of the Zimbabwe National Liberation War Veterans Association, and Veterans Welfare Minister. Today, Ambassador Muchangwa is going to speak as an investment analyst with those vested interests. Ambassador Muchangwa, you may have missed the main presentation from Tinashe, but the question and the problem in the room that we're trying to unpack and to clarify is posing to you this question about the currency. Should we dollarize or not? Tinashe has indicated that we have been going southward since independence. For us to move forward, we need a decade of stability. We need a currency board that's going to deal with our M3, our money supply, and the debt question, which is one of the biggest elephants in the room, which has continued to inflate the money supply by the constant borrowing that we have seen externally and domestically. So I would want us to begin the conversation with you from the point of, should we dollarize or not dollarize from the investment perspective? I invite you, Honorable Mchangwa. Honorable Mchangwa, if you are speaking, you are on mute.
Do you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes, yes, we can hear you. You are on Galaxy S21.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I missed a part of your first presentation. I heard the substance of the preceding presentation. You know, there are views which have been expressed about the debt of Zimbabwe, the expropriation by corruption and all these things. Let me start by saying that I have been very much involved in trying to move the Zimbabwean economy from allocation to market forces. I basically believe that supply and demand should be the determinant of the Zimbabwean market, including on the foreign currency market. And the issues which have been articulated, they beg on the fundamentals of what is wrong with the model which has existed, which is basically a colonial model where we have been used as a country to feed other nations, particularly those from the West. And we have missed out on the development opportunity which should have been accorded to this country since 1960s when Singapore opened up and we went to a closed economy, and Rhodesia fared worse after that, and it caused us into a war. So the basic fundamental reason why we were left behind is a colonial one. If we had gone Singapore, opening up, being democratic in the 1960s, we would not be where we are. Secondly, we persisted even after Mugabe with an allocation economy. You can't allocate resources in an economy and expect the economy to grow. That's why I was behind the push to have the reintroduction of the auction. But where I want to beg to differ, everybody says corruption. The biggest corruption which this country has seen has come from the abuse of the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange, which has been actually an instrument of taking hard currency out of Zimbabwe and taking it out to the West. If you go on internet today, you will see a derivative called Bright Sphere BSIG, which has been performing well on the New York Stock Exchange. And that derivative has been supported previously as Old Mutual Asset Management Services from this country. How does a country which is a basket case support a derivative which is a stellar performer on the New York Stock Exchange? And you find it in the fact that the former government allowed what was called fungibility for one stock, which was Old Mutual, when everybody else was not fungible. It means they couldn't trade in US dollars. And so that stock became the punting ground of foreign investors who would buy that stock, and then everybody would then get the stock certificates of Old Mutual, go to London where it was mount listed, go to Nairobi where it was listed, go to JSE where it was listed, and everybody would take money out of this country. And the Reserve Bank was obliged to honor that expropriation of the Zimbabwe foreign currency by that particular stock. Last year, but one, in 2020, the present president put a statutory instrument and closed that loophole. For 6 months, this country had a stable currency, and it performed well, you know, showing that there was no more expropriation of money through the stock exchange, through a derivative, through this derivative. And everybody who knows economics and finance 101 knows what derivatives do to the economy if they are abused. You have to close New York several times, and I'll give you a case where a derivative was abused recently and the stock exchange was closed. We had a similar experience, and for 6 months, between June 2020 and January 2021, we had a stable currency. Then some people convinced, again, the regulators at the Zimbabwe Securities Exchange Commission to introduce again that derivative. And today, that derivative is called Old Mutual Exchange Traded Fund. And it is being punted upon by foreigners who are using that stock exchange, that stock as a way to buy into Zimbabwe and then get money out. And it is the one which is driving the currency, the problems which we have today, because this is an abuse of a derivative. It's basic finance 101. I don't understand why Zimbabweans don't understand what everybody else in the world understands, which is the abuse of a stock exchange in competition to the central bank, even when the central bank decided to go for the auction market. So this derivative is the main problem why the currency will never be stable. Whether we use the US dollar or whatever currency we use, God's currency, as long as somebody is profiting from a derivative which everybody else is not trading in. It's like dressing a girl from Nyanga on the catwalk and you make her compete with a girl who has come from New York on the same. It doesn't matter what her beauty is. She will lose because she doesn't have the grooming, she doesn't have the clothes. And that's the problem which we have had with our stock exchange. My first instinct, in fact, it is not an instinct, from empirical proof from 2020, we just close the stock exchange or we shut down that derivative. Then there's proper and spontaneous price discovery in the Zimbabwean market. You can't have a price discovery where somebody is sitting on top of Mount Nyangani and waving that this is the price of the Zimbabwe dollar and is using that derivative to drive the foreign exchange market. It's not a fair demand and supply exchange market. So let's close that stock exchange. In any event, we are not Taiwan, we are not China, we are not Turkey. Why do we need an industrial stock exchange of laggards, of companies which have no brand names, which are selling? They are not Apple, they are not Huawei, they are not Samsung. Why do we need those companies on the stock exchange to be traded in a foreign exchange market which they are not earning? So I recommended to the government of Zimbabwe that, and I'm the godfather of this Victoria Falls Stock Exchange, where we are saying those companies which earn hard currency, they go to the Victoria Stock Exchange. And if you want and you think urimonya, inogona kuita business in Zimbabwe, in hard currency, leave the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange, go to the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange and trade in hard US dollars, so that that opportunity for arbitrage, which the former speaker is talking about, is removed completely from the Zimbabwe stock market by having people trade in US dollars on a competitive stock exchange, which is global, which is VFX. But people, for ideological reasons, have been refusing that. And when it comes again to the investment which you talk about, the Zimbabwean assets which God gave to us, they are so big in terms of value, in minerals, in what they can compete on the global market on their own. And I'm talking from experience because I have been bringing some of the biggest investors in this country since I became a ambassador to China. China tobacco is 10 times bigger than Philip Morris. It is the one which has started the contract tobacco farming. It is the one which has been earning $600 to $700 million for rural people for the past 10 years and was the main driver of the stock of the auction floors in Zimbabwe and earning the currency which they said Zimbabwe Reserve Bank was trading, which was then abused on the stock exchange, taken away from peasants by people at the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange and then abused. So I know what I'm talking about when I'm bringing investment. That's a Fortune 500 #1 company in tobacco, China tobacco. It is an investor in this country. Why do you say investors run away when they're given an opportunity? Right now, as I talk, I've got the biggest steel company in the whole world. Because the iron ore of Zimbabwe, because of the chrome of Zimbabwe, because of the coking coal of Zimbabwe, they are world class. We are having a company built the largest steel plant in Africa, 200 kilometers from where we are now in Harare in Chivu. This company doesn't complain all the things which are being talked about, because it looks at what has got Zimbabwe got to offer in terms of its resources, and he is the top one in steel, and he's putting money. He has already put money in Selu. We are exporting ferrochrome to the tune of 150 million. He doesn't complain about the corruption things which we are talking about. He has put money in Wangenau. We are exporting coking coal. We are going to 400,000 tons in the next 5 months. ArcelorMittal of South Africa, the largest steel company in Africa, they are buying from Zimbabwe. These are investors who are putting money in this country. They are not whining and wincing the way it is being explained. Those who wince and whine are small-minded investors who allow the stockbrokers at the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange to pretend as if they are big players in global economics, when all of them are midgets just milking off the little money which comes from the gold paners and from the tobacco farmers. Let's close those avenues, those loopholes which cause the major hemorrhage of capital out of this market, not this pinpointing of petty politicians, most of them who die in poverty anyway, when they are being told they are corrupt. I've seen many of them, they come and when they were about to die, they came to me, they wanted me to buy a supermarket food for them, and they were ministers. So I don't want, I may know that one or two may have been beaten a bottle of whiskey, but it doesn't change the economy of Zimbabwe. But when we look at the fundamentals, it is the abuse of the stock market of Zimbabwe, which has been the main driver of the hemorrhaging, of the expropriation of money out of this country. And Old Mutual has been the main culprit. Nobody wants to pinpoint them through their derivatives, which have been on the stock exchange. I may not have a quarrel with Old Mutual itself as a stock, but I have a quarrel with Old Mutual and its derivative stocks. And today they insist on having an ETF, an exchange traded fund, which is traded in US dollars. When they are not earning themselves those US dollars, they are being earned by mining companies. If they think they are big Old Mutual, they should go and register as a trading company, an ETF in Victoria Falls, not on the sickly Zimbabwe Stock Exchange, where small midgets, stockbrokers, pretend they are big. And incidentally, they are a club who keep away other stockbrokers who have worked abroad in Singapore, in New York, in London. They keep them away because they are profiting from this hemorrhaging of the Zimbabwean stock of capital. And everybody points their finger wrongly at the wrong place. So I'm talking whether what you are saying is true or not. There will be big investments in Zimbabwe, and I know what I'm talking about because I am the driver of those big investments into this country. And they will change this economy, and they will make sure that Zimbabwe dollar will be stable. That's what I want to put across.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Muchangwa, for those submissions that you have made. And I'm sure that we will come back to them. And I would want Tinashe, the main presenter, to respond to how you have characterized the currency problems that we have from the business perspective. But when I'm also intently listening to you, I hear, policy failure as well by government in terms of investment policy and dealing with these issues when it comes to the currency and to how business has been doing business in Zimbabwe. And you put forward as well the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange, a tax haven, and maybe where business have to then operate. And I'm not sure how that is going to operate without leakages and the expropriation as well that Chennai spoke to. So Chennai will also speak to this issue. So Tinashe, I would want you to note the points in terms of responding to how Ambassador Muchangwa has characterized these problems that we are currently facing, because you did a totally different and holistic thing when you're looking at each decade from independence, with the graph that you shared with us in terms of money supply, in terms of debt, in terms of how we've been doing business, and how inflation, CPI index, and the like have been playing out. So I hope that you come back to that. But maybe before I call on you, I would like to invite my final panelist, who is Dr. Caleb Mailoni Fundanga, the ex-governor, Zambian Reserve Bank, and the board member of the RBZ. As Professor Mandaza indicated, I think we have shared similar experiences before of hyperinflation, of currency crisis with Zambia. At one point, I remember being a little girl and growing up and hearing that in Zambia, for you to buy a loaf of bread, you need to push a wheelbarrow to the supermarket to buy that loaf of bread. We've been trillionaires in Zimbabwe. We have, witnessed a whole lot of similar experiences like Zambia. Dr. Fundanga has served as governor of the Bank of Zambia since March 2002. He was appointed governor after serving as a senior advisor to the president of the African Development Bank in Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire from 1998. He further served as executive director at the African Development Bank. Dr. Fundanga has also served as permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance for 6 years at Cabinet Office, before finally winding up in the Office of the President as permanent secretary in charge of the National Commission for Development Planning. He has many achievements. Some of them include being Banker Magazine Award of Central Bank of the Year, Global and Africa at the beginning of 2008, as well as the Emerging Markets Magazine Award of Central Banker of the Year in 2007, bestowed in September 2007 in Washington, D.C. He was also awarded the Central Banker of the Year 2008 by the Annual Meetings Daily Magazine. Dr. Fundanga is currently the alternate governor of the IMF Board of Governors. Further, he is a member of the African Export and Import Bank Board and Executive Committee. He also serves as board member and vice chairperson of the Zambia Revenue Authority. He is currently the chairman of the Junior Achievement Zambia Board and has also served as chairperson of the Programs Committee of the African Research Consortium. We hope to tap from his experiences in all these capacities and that have led to the different achievements that I've outlined in terms of how as Zimbabwe we can deal with our currency crisis. And I think what we'd want to hear from Dr. Fundanga is a Pan-African perspective, having held different portfolios within the African Development Bank, within the African Export and Import Bank Board, Executive Committee, the IMF, Zambia Revenue Authority, and the like. And I think we're going to learn more of the experiences that he has and how he thinks Zimbabwe should take this issue forward. So Dr. Fundanga, I'll give you 10 minutes to share with us your perspective on this topic. You've had the main presentation, you've had two discussants. We are trying to define and to characterize the problem and how we should move forward. And I'm sure you've been listening through. I'll give you your 10 minutes now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, moderator. I hope you can hear me. I also want to thank Sapes Trust for coming up with this topic, and also the various presenters. Natasha's presentation was excellent. Tanai also put in an important perspective, and of course the ambassador. It's nice to see him. I must mention that between 2014 and 2018, I was actually a resident in Harare. I was executive director at MEFMI, and it's that opportunity which gave me some chance to learn a little bit more about the Zimbabwean economy and the challenges and the lost opportunities. I think for me, I've always regarded Zimbabwe as a land of opportunities. I always used to make some presentation when I was there on natural resource management. And I was saying that if you Google minerals in Zimbabwe, see the long list of minerals there, and compare with other countries, it is truly a very rich country, and it has got rare minerals, which are becoming increasingly important. So this is the country that we are discussing. I must say that the first presentation by Natasha was very good because it showed the historical relationship between public expenditure, the growth in broad money, M3, and how this affects the consumer price index. That relationship is very, very strong. It therefore means that at the key of addressing all these problems of inflation, currencies, and so forth, you need to have a very strong fiscal regime, which ensures that you don't borrow the way you are describing. I think where Tinai was describing a situation where you borrow money to fund the parastatal, and for many years it doesn't produce anything, and you are just paying interest. That is lost money, and it contributes to the misery of the people. It is these things. If the government is running its center, because let's admit it, governments are the biggest business in a country, even in the developed countries. You can see when they start killing each other, those people producing those arms, they must be getting pretty rich during periods when people are dying. So governments are important, and what they do would settle or unsettle an economy. I'm glad that you mentioned this fact, comparison with Zambia. Zambia, we've gone through the same episodes. And for me, the best lesson I had was the time when I served at the central bank, because when I went there, inflation was very high. Everybody wanted the dollar in their pocket. And if you didn't have the dollar, you felt like you were very poor. Yet you didn't need the dollar to buy your sweet potatoes, your groundnuts, your meal, and things like that. But yet we all felt poor without a dollar in your pocket. I'm glad to say that the last dollar I've had in my purse, I got it last year from a Zimbabwean lady who came to visit here, and I haven't spent it at all. Everything I spent Zambian kwacha. And for me, it was a matter of religion because I was signing on the money. I could not accept that the money I signed on could lose value. So I was I'm proud to say that when I left a strong currency. We had accumulated foreign exchange reserves, and the government books were in order. Of course, this was not a victory for the central bank, but it's for the government because after all, the budget is run by the Minister of Finance. And if there is a will there to run things properly, then you can actually have stability, macroeconomic stability. And people will start having confidence in the local currency. Right now, our kwacha has been appreciating somewhat. And I can tell you that in Zambia today, it's better to have kwacha balance in your account than to have a dollar account. But we are free. I've got a dollar account myself here. I can open a pound sterling account. There is no restriction. But that pressure you feel, like I used to see in Zimbabwe when I was working in Harare, that if you go, I remember one time going to the supermarket and I produced some dollars. I thought there was going to be a robbery or something. Somebody rushed to tell me, don't pay. I'll pay with my, what do you call it, Eco Cash. And you give me the dollar. I mean, that kind of situation is not what we want to see in our African countries. I'm also very grateful to Ambassador Chris for mentioning this issue of the stock exchange and this mutual exchange traded derivatives. I'm sure most of you have read Governor Gono's book, Zimbabwe, the Casino Economy. Is that, I'm sure I read it when he produced it. And at the center of that was that issue of the stock exchange. When I was there, one time I was privileged to be a guest speaker at the function held by the is it confederation of whatever, the companies on the Zim stock exchange, and how they performed and so forth. And when we looked at the performance, we found that each time when the Zim economy was really down, the stock exchange was doing very well. There has been that relationship all the time. Even in recent times, when things have been bad for the Zimbabwean economy, stock exchange was doing very well, which means that people are just trading numbers and so forth. But they take, indeed, they do take profit from those trading activities. And you should ask where our emphasis should be. Should it be in production? Because clearly, if you are not producing, they are not going to create wealth for people. The inequalities you see even in the allocation of foreign exchange are there, but you can't end them unless people are producing goods and services and they are earning incomes from productive activities, as opposed to just, I used to see heaps of Zimdollars at Eastgate shopping mall, just behind Nikos there, heaps and heaps. I mean, that's not how we're going to get our economies moving. So what should we be doing in order to get things going? Obviously, there are many things you can list which need to be fixed. And I will not probably attempt to do that because I don't have the time. But also, I believe that my colleagues on the panel have tried to address some of the things. One of the key issues you have to address in Zimbabwe is the dual currency. Do you need the dollar lying side by side with the Zimbabwe dollar? Sometimes I tend to think maybe the problem is that we call our local currency Zimdollar. Maybe we should give it matopos or something so that the relationship between the US dollar and can completely be forgotten. It might be useful. I'm just, dreaming of what can be done. But it does cause a problem that as long as the US dollar is an option, people sometimes just want it. They think it's a store of value. So they want it for its own sake. You would happily have a lot of dollars circulating, and each time there are billions, probably, but there isn't just enough to officially transact, to import critical things, and so forth. So somewhat, perhaps it will take some courage to say, look, we want to only to have our own currency and manage this currency properly through good macroeconomic management so that it doesn't lose value. And if possible, it can gain value. So that will help. The issue of the auction, I am a strong advocate of the auctioning of foreign currency, a market-based allocation system which removes the bias of individuals. We had it here, but I must also say that merely having an auction is not the solution because the auction system has to be properly run. And I think in recent times, we have had some of those challenges where an auction is held, but no money is allocated, which would constitute like a false auction. Because you believe you have won, but maybe it takes you months before finally you get allocated. Why should you do that? So the most important thing is that you only trade what is available. If you have got 5 million that week, just auction 5 million, Dutch auction, those who really want it will pay more for it, but they will not be as competitive as those who paid less. This is what brings market discipline. If that were done, probably there will be fewer problems. I know that when we went through there, we had problems. Eventually, we migrated to a market-based interbank system where trading takes place not by a fixed auction date, but every day you are going to the banks, you want to buy dollars, they will quote you. There's a buying and selling price, and you buy according to your needs and so forth. And it's going on, but the system generates information, morning, lunch hour, closing time. Everybody can see from their screens that this is the ruling rate at the moment. The central bank just provides a summary of the exchange rates emerging in the particular. For me, this system can work, but you've got to trust it. Everything that you do in life, you've got to trust that it will work, and you apply yourself towards making sure that it works. If there are always doubts that it might not work, then you are going to have a lot of problems. There are obviously a lot of things that put pressure on the market in Zimbabwe. I can list some of them. For instance, I know that there were bad cases of importers of fuel who got allocated foreign exchange, but go and sell the same fuel in US dollars. It's a double allocation. Where is the money? That is probably fueling the black market. There are also, I noticed, for instance, towards the end of last year, government institutions and everybody were paying annual bonuses in US dollars. Is this necessary? Obviously, it just generates many problems. There are also other issues of refining the market. Should we have multiple windows for foreign currency, or just one window where everybody can feeding from the same pot? All these are issues which need to be addressed in order that we can refine the market and make it work. But let me just
I'll ask you to round up, Dr. Fundanga, maybe by just outlining as Zambia what had to be done beyond the currency, because that is what I'm also hearing.
Yes, we have always had kwacha here. We have never tried to get to the, but what was done in Zambia was to give the public, the fiscal side, some shocks. I can tell you, after we introduced multi-party system and then we had liberal economy, there was chaos. Inflation was 180% and so forth. But what the government did was, under Minister Penza, they introduced what they were calling the cash budget. I was the permanent secretary at that time. It was a very difficult shock, but you only spent money which was allocated to you on a monthly basis. It did not take long to stabilize the market. So those are the shocks you need, so that people don't think there is just free money anyhow. You only spend, even to buy some toiletries and things, you only spent what was allocated to you. If you did not show how you used the money the previous month, nothing was allocated to you. And then everybody will be pointing their fingers at you as a controlling officer, as the one who is causing them all the miseries. That was done in Zambia, and it did create some shock. But Zambia has also been plagued with problems of debt. We benefited from the HIPC debt relief, which unfortunately Zimbabwe has not. So that is something. But Zimbabwe has not been borrowing a lot internationally of late, which means that the rate of accumulation of new debt has been somewhat restricted, which might be a good thing in the long run. But the debt was cancelled. But the very good and important lesson that Zimbabwe can learn is that even if you have your debt cancelled, it reemerges very quickly, immediately. Those controls over public expenditure are relaxed. When we left 2011, we had very low debt levels. Today, Zambia is again one of the most heavily indebted countries. It is looking for some debt relief of some sort and so forth. So don't rejoice. Always focus on what is supposed to be done. Don't think you have gotten out of the woods. You will never get out of them if there is no financial discipline. I think that's probably the most important lesson. Import what is necessary, but encourage local production, because that is the thing which is sustainable. I hope I put a summary, I don't know.
Yes, you did. And I'll come back to you at some point as well, just before we close, Dr. Fundanga. But I think you're raising fundamental issues. We have been talking, this topic is about the Zimbabwe dollar and re-dollarizing to the US dollar. And when you are speaking, you're throwing in 2 or 3 more currencies. One, the confidence currency, the trust currency. There's the shock therapy that you're talking about that we may need if we to deal with our currency crisis, our hyperinflationary environment, as well as the volatile exchange rate foreign currency system that we have. So I think those are fundamental issues that we have to deal with. So it's not only, and I think it's a nuance that I was getting as well from almost all the presenters, that it's not just about the dollarizing to the US dollar. There's an issue of confidence, there's an issue of trust, there's an issue of other pillars that we have to deal with administratively, governance, public administration, governance issues, policy issues, fiscal management, deal with the 4 pillars of production and the like. So I like how the conversation is coming together from the experiences that you have also shared from Zambia, which has gone through the same journey and episodes that Zimbabwe is going through. We have 30 minutes And I would want to come back to Tinashe. You had Honorable Mchangwa, and I posed questions to you for you to respond. You have had Chennai, you have also had Dr. Fundanga, and the issue of confidence, of trust, of characterizing our problem, and our unbanked population because of lack of trust and confidence and policy inconsistencies that have been outlined almost by all the discussants as well. So Tinashe, I would want to give you an opportunity to respond to the discussants and to further your conversation from the presentation. I think I'll give you about 3.5 to 4 minutes of that before I move on to Chennai. I'll move on to Ambassador Mchangwa, then I'll come back to Dr. Fundanga.
Thank you very much, Janet. That was good, very good analysis being done there. So directly you asked that I respond to Honorable Mutsongo. I must start off by saying that I'm glad that Honorable Mutsongo actually believes in free markets. I think he was very emphatic. I counted the number of times he said free market, and he said it in a positive light. So this is quite contrary to some of his colleagues, and that he believes in the free market. I think I fully support him in that instance. It also makes my job easier. It means that he understands economics. So it makes my job very easier. He spoke of the stock market and what's happening with the stock market. I think what I would say to him is that the stock market does not create money. It does not in any way create money. Money finds its way onto the stock market. So we must ask ourselves, where is the money coming from? Who prints money? Where is the monopoly of printing money? It is not the stock market. That's number one. Number two, we've seen old mutual implied, the old mutual implied rate. I think in 2018, 2019, it was Old Mutual was left the bourse, the local bourse. And I think at the time, the exchange rate between the Zimdollar and the US dollar was around 18. I think the implied rate then was 1:18. Right now, the power market rate is now at 1:450. And Old Mutual is not there. The Old Mutual implied rates, the fungibility is not there. Where did that money come from? How come the stock market is going up? Where is that money coming from? So I think let's address the cause of where the money is coming from. Let's not address how people are trying to preserve their money. So I've given you back my graph to show you that in 2008, at the height of hyperinflation, government debt turned to zero. It means that savers were the ones who lost money. So this time around, savers are trying to preserve their money. And that's why you find them going to the stock market, preserve their wealth. It's savers, it's pensioners who are suffering. Pensioners, pension funds are the ones who are dominating in the stock market. But asset management companies do not create money. As we have seen from everything that I've said, if you look at the money supply since 1980, if you look at 1995, government debt that's going up, and I think Caleb succinctly put it across as well, that this relationship of money supply and government debt is driven by government itself. And if you look at right now, the big problem that we have is we've got offshore debt of $20 billion. We've got negative reserves at the central bank, and the central bank keeps creating money. Government keeps borrowing. Where will that money find itself? It finds itself on the stock market, but the stock market does not create money. So I would like to throw the question back to Honorable Mchangwa. I'm glad that he believes in free markets, as I do. And I would like to ask him that if he believes in free markets, where is the money? How does the stock market create money? The money is created, the stock market is actually Zimdollars. It is Zimbabwean dollar. You buy using Zimbabwean dollar and you sell using Zimbabwean dollar. You receive Zimbabwean dollars. And most of the players who receive these Zimbabwean dollars are prohibited from buying currency. They have to pay out pensioners using Zimbabwean dollars. So it's a purely Zimbabwean dollar market. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tinashe, for that contribution and also the seeking of clarity. But I also would want my discussants to also address the issue that despite the fact that we have a Zimdollar economy, the economy itself is re-dollarized, even without the policy. This you see in the pricing, you see, you know, in how citizens are looking for the dollar to preserve or to store value in the like. So in some way, the economy has done this in itself, but it's very expensive, of course. So let me come to you, Chennai, your contributions before, of course, we take maybe a few questions from the chat box, but also from the participants. So I'll give you about 3 minutes.
Thanks, Janet, and thank you to Ambassador Mchangwa for his presentation, which highlights some interesting points, really, as evidence to some of the points I raised earlier. I think I'll start by saying to the ambassador, just in case there is a young woman listening from Nyanga, it's very much possible for a young woman in Nyanga to compete on a New York runway. We have seen people like Iman come straight off Nairobi, the streets of Nairobi, Somalia, and a few other models that have definitely made it from the streets of Africa onto the New York runway. So, but without further ado, to speak more to the points that we're here to talk about. So when we're looking at the case of the old mutual derivatives and other arbitrage behavior that we have seen, even the government attempting to address in the past, we have seen a slap on the wrist that was given to Old Mutual when they were stopped from participating in the stock markets. And I think recently, in the last year or two, that has been lifted. And really, this points to what I referred to as our economic market infrastructure that is really responsible for a lot of this expropriation, whether it's through the stock markets, whether it's through the interchange auction, whether it's through even some other dealings that we see with state-owned enterprises. Where is our market infrastructure? Where is the role of the central bank? Really, you know, if I would look more to people like Ambassador Mchangwa, who have access to the central bank governor, because really you mentioned a time frame where you said this happened in the old dispensation and it's continued to happen in the new dispensation. But in both dispensations, we've had the same central bank governor. So I would hope that perhaps in the next iteration of this conversation, you are actually able to articulate to say, this is what was presented to the central bank and their role really as custodian of the of that kind of financial regulatory environment. What are they doing to address that? And when we look at our economic infrastructure, and I'll say it again, at the moment, the way we're infrastructured, somebody would say is a gangster's paradise, really. We see the Victoria Stock Exchange tax havens, where we have ridiculous tax incentives being offered to international investors. The ambassador has highlighted a lot of international investment where we only read about it. It's only evident on paper. What we want to know is how much of the multiplier effect is Zimbabwe experiencing from having such big, strong companies investing in Zimbabwe. Are they banking in Zimbabwe? How are they remitting? How are they paying off their wages to their employees? Do we have employees that are working for these companies being paid in the US dollar? You know, we want to see the whole picture from start to finish, not just that we have them signed up to do this really big, amazing project, because we already know, I mean, it's not a secret, Zimbabwe is the second largest producer of chrome in the world. So this is not a secret. It's not a surprise that you have big companies, big investors coming from China wanting to invest in chrome. We have the largest deposit. It makes sense. What we want to know is, where is that multiplier effect that says we have such a big investor coming in? Where is it? Where is their digital footprint? How are they contributing to STEM? to our STEM environment in terms of education? How are they contributing to the currency that we have within the country? Because that is the problem. You know, we have international investors. Are they banking in Zimbabwe? Are they remitting in Zimbabwe? Because if they are, guess what? We should be really experiencing this on the street. We shouldn't be trying to look for money under the table and under the chairs. It should be obvious. We shouldn't be sat here waiting to be told who came and who invested. We should already know this as citizens of Zimbabwe. So we really have a big problem in terms of our market infrastructure and the role that the central bank has contributed in ensuring that we do not retain value from business activities. We do not retain value, like Tinashe said, from this assumed free market status. Where is the value, and how and what is the central bank doing to try and retain that? And as you were speaking about the issue of dollarizing, you know, we cannot, we have to dollarize in the first instance because we are very much an import-backed economy. This is why we are constantly looking, the demand is for external currency. The demand is for the US dollar, because that is how we pay for the things that we need, you know? So when you look at our, I understand the other time that apparently we've got 60-something% of products on the supermarket shelves that are produced locally. However, the raw materials are imported. So then that creates a demand for external currency, and the market will respond, like somebody said earlier, to supply and demand. We need foreign currency because we are not yet at a position where we have a complete value chain that starts and finishes in Zimbabwe. We've got a lot of raw materials that we import. We've got a lot of basic commodities that we import. And because we import a lot of raw materials, those local goods are very expensive. So for the most people that are on a low income, low wage situation, they will look to buying their basic commodities across borders where they are cheaper, because the Zimbabwe products are too expensive because of our value chain that is strained and constrained by imported raw materials and other key factors such as the poor transport network, etc. Yes. And all these things contribute to the cost. So this is why we will continue to see a natural demand for the US dollar. And we need to just accept that that is where we are. We need to curtail arbitrage dealing by paddling to the parallel exchange market and the interchange auction, which is a pegged market, because that is creating further arbitrage behavior that then continues to devalue the local currency. But one more important thing that we see, and I think Governor Caleb highlighted this about, about the perception index in terms of how we look at the Zimbabwe dollar and the relationship with the US dollar. And I want to extend what he was saying. He was saying, should we call it the Matopos dollar? But the problem that we have now in Zimbabwe is we have a Zimbabwe dollar, then we have a Zimbabwe US dollar. So you will see that the US dollar at the moment is stable. It's strengthening in the time of crisis because the market is responding very well to it. You know, in the wake of the Ukraine crisis, in the wake of the Shanghai lockdowns, etc., the US dollar is stable, but not in Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, the real value of the US dollar is actually declining. And you know that when you see that a liter of milk is almost $2 in Zimbabwe, just basic, not that is organic, not anything, basic milk.
I'll come back to you. I'll come back to you. Yes, I want to move on. Maybe in 30 seconds, I'll come back to you all, because the big question as we are moving as discussants is what is it that we should do and what is the way forward for Zimbabwe? And from Chennai, I think you're saying the first instance is for us to dollarize because there's that natural demand for the US dollar. We have an import-based economy and the like, as you're saying. Let me move on to Ambassador Muchangwa. I'll give you 2 minutes, Ambassador Muchangwa, for you to make your responses to the submissions that have been made, or the responses and the reactions to your contributions. 2 minutes, Ambassador Muchangwa, so that we can pick some questions from the floor. Ambassador Muchangwa. I think Ambassador Muchangwa is not yet there. For the sake of time, let me move
Hello,
on.
Do you hear me now?
Okay. Yes, I can. Sure. Go ahead, Ambassador Muchangwa.
First, I want to hail my colleague from Zambia. He has highlighted what is the elephant in the room, which is the stock exchange of Zimbabwe, which has been used to abuse the foreign exchange market in this country. It has been used for hemorrhaging currency out of this. The unfortunate thing is all of the people who speak other than him, they've got a fetish about this stock exchange. They worship it as if it is a work of God when it is a relic of colonialism. I have been a securities exchange commissioner, so I know what I'm talking about from inside. I was the one who was behind pushing the government to every suspension of it. And we had a stable currency for 6 months until those who believe in fetishes of colonialism be reversed and brought old mutual back. And people say this or that. Why would a stock exchange perform well when the economy of a country is not performing well? Why would you do that? And if you do that in other countries, you close the stock exchange. New York was closed precisely because of that. A couple of weeks ago, we had the LME closed because it bilked the price of nickel in one day by from $40,000 to $300,000 in one day. And the owners of the stock exchange closed it. But here, because people believe in colonial relics, they still want to worship that stock exchange. My view is that let it be closed, let price discovery in Zimbabwe be spontaneous. And in terms of attracting, we are not an export-led, an import-led economy. We are earning more foreign currency than Kenya. We are earning more foreign currency than all the countries in the region. So it's a lie that we are an import-led economy. It is the abuse of the foreign exchange which we earn by those who favor foreigners, who pound on the stock exchange. Then they take money out of this country. And I am dealing with those things because I am a major
Ambassador Muchangwa, so from the stock exchange.
Wait. I am a major attractor of investment in this country. I did the tobacco industry. I am the one who was behind the legalization of the young SME gold partners who are now
Ambassador Muchangwa, I hear you as the godfather of the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange. What should we do? Should we dollarize or not?
We don't dollarize. You stop the hemorrhage of the currency out of the country, which is earned by
who stops the hemorrhage? Is it a government policy issue?
We stop it by having regulators who respond to the wishes of the people of Zimbabwe.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to move on to Dr. Fundanga. You have spoken about the shock therapy. I would want to find out from Zambia. Zambia is such an interesting case. Thank you, Ambassador Muchangwa. I'll come back to you for 30 seconds before we close, just as we all close to find the way forward and where we are. The shock therapy in Zambia, was there consensus around us, and would this work for Zimbabwe? You spoke about public confidence in the system, including the auction system, managing it and the like. How did you do this in Zambia? And is it possible? I think these are some of the questions that I would want you to respond to in terms of public confidence and policy changes and the shock therapy framework that I've spoken to. And of course, I want you to answer to the recommendation, should we dollarize or not?
I'm always a believer in the local currency. And I believe that local currencies get weakened because of poor fiscal management. When you have got huge deficits, you are borrowing, you are creating more money, but very few goods. Obviously, the local currency will lose value. If you are holding something in your hand and it has got value, are you going to throw it away? You hold on to it. I've seen this, for instance. I can tell you that when we started managing the economy properly, our currency started to gain, and people preferred to hold Zambian kwacha than US dollar. It just happened naturally. I'll give you a very good story in the interest of time, but I'll give you a very good example. I had bought a horse for my daughter because she wanted to be riding. And I was keeping it in a library owned by a certain British woman. And when I went there, she said, you have to pay me in dollars because me, I have to send money to UK. I said, fine, I can go to the Bureau de Change. My salary is in Kwacha. I went to the Bureau de Change every month, exchanged and paid. 1 month, she refused to take the US dollar. Why? Because now the Kwacha had strengthened. So these things do happen. If you are managing the economy properly, the macroeconomy is stable, people, it was not even a question of persuading them. We do make economic decisions. You will know that it's useless to hold a dollar in your hand if it's losing value. In the same way that it's useless to hold a kwacha in your hand if it's losing its value. So it's those things, those actions, which collectively change the attitude of the people towards their local currency. I will tell you also that even in terms of trading, our own people now found it much cheaper to buy an air ticket to go to Dubai or to go to China to buy things and they come and sell. They don't have jobs, but they were employing themselves and the things they were buying were selling in the market. So it's that confidence is brought about through fiscal actions of the government. If the government is managing its funding properly, you won't find people shunning their own local currency because it's value they're after. It's not just a pleasure of having US dollars in your pocket. I hope I've addressed that. But coming to, let me just pick up one issue I picked up concerning Zimbabwe production. Let me say at independence, Zimbabwe was second only to South Africa in terms of manufactured output. All of us in the region here, we used to buy our things from Zimbabwe or South Africa. This position changed drastically due to certain things that happened there. Take for instance, textiles. Zimbabwe has got a very good textile industry. You could buy most of the casuals. They were using local cotton. Their textile mills were productive and so forth. What happened to those white, whatever? I think Kadoma or somewhere there was a big factory. These were destroyed. Today, you can't get good quality cotton shirts I used to buy from, this one I'm wearing is from Zimbabwe also. But these things were produced there. And if Zimbabwe had access to Algoa, it would have been one of the best performers because it already could produce a lot of the casuals that the Americans wanted. But unfortunately, that is another issue. So it is possible. The raw materials were there. Tea, Tanganda tea, I've been drinking Tanganda tea since my childhood. These are Zimbabwean products. The Mazoi, squash, these are Zimbabwean products. So many other things. We had a good steel industry and many other good things. But somewhat we lost it. So it therefore means that it's not impossible to find raw materials to go into Zimbabwean industry. We've been talking of metals. Most of these go into the production process. So it's perhaps we need a national endowment where we can identify what is possible. If there are certain things which are not being done, what can we do in order to attract investment into those so that we start producing them again? Because most of them were produced in Zimbabwe, but they have disappeared, possibly because the incentives were gone or we did something which chased them away. I will end there. Sorry, moderator.
No, that is perfect and a good way for you to end it, Dr. Fundanga. I see that there are a number of comments in the chat box. One was to you, Dr. Fundanga. What are your thoughts on positive rate of return to savings? If savers cannot be rewarded, is credit awarded efficiently? And I think you've spoken to fiscal management, to economic management that builds confidence, that rewards those that are saving, that gives them the confidence and the trust that they have to have. I just want to take, I don't know if they like two very short 30-second contributions from the group that are burning. May I see your hands to the panelists if you need any clarification or you have a contribution in terms of whether we should dollarize or we should not. I'm looking for hands. I see Dr. Chipakacha saying when is the time when politicians will stop to the blame game and also admit some mistakes. Tony Day says decent economic policy. Yes, let me take Ed. Please unmute and share your contribution. And I'll have Caleb Dengu as well. 30 seconds, so you have a minute each, then we'll wrap this up. Ed, please unmute. Ed is not unmuted. Caleb, you can go ahead if you can unmute. Yes.
Okay, thanks very much for bringing this subject, because I think it's really critical about whether we should dollarize or not. To me, what our basic problem in Zimbabwe is trust, which has been emphasized by everyone. No one trusts the central bank, no one trusts the currency and everything. That's already known, that's why people are looking for value. But how to do it? We need a currency board. I think where we are now, there's no alternative. But let's not just talk about that. I thought this debate was going to be who become the currency board members. We need a currency board staffed with international economists and domestic and everything, which is trusted by the public to issue currency, because the Reserve Bank at the moment is both a player and a referee. It borrows and everything. So you need a separate currency board, like Singapore has got a currency board, Malaysia has got a currency board, which is independent from the central bank. And its role is to just manage the currency. It can peg the currency against one of the major tradable currencies. You can peg it to the rand or to the Chinese yuan or any. It doesn't have to be the US dollar. It can choose any. But it is that good management of the currency which will encourage us to live. So that's really my contribution. I'm not going to take in, because it's a whole subject which I've written a book about.
Caleb, thank you very much. And I think your namesake did very well in terms of economic management, building public trust and confidence, covering all the pillars. Production and kickstarting production is a starting point for us, even before we go to the currency. I don't know if Ed is now back online. Ed, or if there's any other hand. You can mute Caleb Bengu so that I can see the other hands. Okay, thank you. You're not, okay, thank you. I do not,
Can I come in?
Yes, yes, Professor Ibo.
Yes, I think one of the things we want to hear from, as we conclude this session, what's to be done.
Yes.
You know, Caleb Dengue has proposed a currency board.
Yes.
And
Tinashe as well.
Caleb Fundanga was very emphatic as what they did in Zambia. Fiscal management, fiscal discipline.
Yeah.
How do we start on those levels? And two, what must be done by government now? What is our proposal to government as to what is to be done to strengthen confidence, to strengthen the local currency?
Yes.
What must be done urgently?
Yes, thank you. So this is the 30 seconds or so that I wanted to give to our presenters, starting with the presenter, then the discussants. I had policy issues from Ambassador Mchangwa, from Tinashe, Chennai, and Dr. Fundanga. I had the fiscal management. I had the macroeconomic management issues. I had the building of confidence and trust when we are implementing the policy changes. The currency board, Tinashe expounded on it in his presentation, but he also said we need a decade of stability. And this is supported as well by Chennai when she says what we're dealing with is not only a currency issue, but we're dealing with about 4 pillars that we have to address. So this needs a decade, but we need, what are our quick issues? Dr. Fundanga also spoke about a multi-issue, multi-stakeholder national dialogue. So this dialogue is also leading us to the conversations we have had before within the space, the policy dialogue, the SAPES dialogue policy space, of the need for a policy national dialogue, multi-issue dialogue to discuss these issues. And I think this is becoming more urgent than ever. So let me go back to my presenters, my 4 panelists today. Tinashe, what are the immediate and urgent things that should be done to address the currency crisis or the economic crisis?
Okay, so thank you very much. I totally agree with Taylor. What we need to immediately do is have a currency board. I sort of differ with him slightly, but I think he's got the right principle. It's backed by our trading partners, but I don't think that it should be based in Zimbabwe. It should be underwritten by SADC, because our problem is we can have a currency board like Argentina has had a currency board before, and we just go back to our old ways when we are over borrowing and you've got central bank printing of money. So what I would say immediately what we need to do is to disband the central bank and then have a currency board and then have financial services regulation, and the central bank is focused purely on regulation, and then a currency board that's underwritten by SADC. That would be my immediate. That would stabilize the world.
Thank you.
It's not a panacea, but it's a start.
It's a start. That's the first step that we have to take. Can discuss SADC and its responses to the Zimbabwean situation and other SADC countries' situations, and how sometimes it has been found inept in some of these issues, but the need for a currency board, financial services regulation that is independent is key. Chennai, in 30 seconds, what should we do? What should the government do? What's the recommendation to the government? CZI was very clear in that statement.
Okay, so I think I'll just try and stick to 3 points just in the interest of time. In terms of local currency, for Zimbabwe at the moment, local currency is only fueling arbitrage behavior. Let's just be honest about that. Local currency is usually backed by value in the economy, and we do not have enough productive value to say that we are moving towards or we are insisting on a local currency. At the moment, the lack of a trajectory, the lack of a policy direction in terms of, is Zimbabwe going to officially dollarize, or is it going to go back to the Zimdollar? That kind of stalemate that we have creates a lot of mistrust in the economy and is reducing their bankability. So people are not banking. We have a very high percentage of adults and economic transactions that do not go through the banking system in Zimbabwe. And that has an impact on reserves. It has an impact on deposits, etc. So we really need to be even just one step of being clear of what the trajectory is going forward from the central bank. Are they planning to dollarize? Are they planning to have the single Zimbabwe dollar currency? What is the plan? Because then people will know for sure what is going to happen. It may go some way in restoring trust in the economy. In terms of the currency board, I wholeheartedly support what Tinashe was saying. You know, we are a long way away from a currency board if we do not have the right central bank, because how will that currency board interact with the central bank? How will it monitor some of the quasi-fiscal activities that we've seen through the central bank? We need urgently an overhaul of the central bank. We need different thinking, different mindsets in our central bank. So I would say that should be one of the things that happen first. I would be moving towards dollarizing. For sure, this will stop some of the arbitrage mechanisms and some of the expropriation leakages that we see because people are trading in currency in a way that is not beneficial to the economy. So that will kind of get rid of that problem. As I've said at the beginning, the difference may be marginal, but it would be a benefit. Obviously, in line with the other 3 elements, such as judicial reform, which again we need if we're going to have a currency board. There's no point having a currency board if they cannot take people to court or they cannot actually enact judicial stature should they need to. You know, so as well as the economic market infrastructure that needs to be changed, and the addressing of the public debt.
Thank you. Thank you, Chennai. Ambassador Muchangwa, what should be done?
What should be done is to stop a fetish worship of the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange as the hemorrhaging of the foreign currency of this country comes from that institution. That is fundamental, because no matter what you do, if somebody is using the stock exchange to take money out of the economy, the forex, you never get it right, number one. Secondly, what we are doing is to take Zimbabwean resources to world-class players. I am busy right now getting a $2 billion investment to build a steel plant fully productive in Zimbabwe to produce 600,000 tons and going to 10 million tons of steel within Zimbabwe. And this is being done by the biggest investor in steel in the whole world, a Fortune 500 company. And it is at the third stage of that kind of investment after ferrochrome in Selu, after coke ovens in Hwange, and now they are at the third stage. You go and drive to Mvuma now, you go and see what's going on between Mvuma and Chivu. We have the resources which will attract capital and offset this petty Rhodesian thinking, which thinks that a post-colonial economy is the greatest thing since sliced bread in this country. We got to move this economy to the level which is commensurate to the resources of Zimbabwe, which is commensurate to the brains of Zimbabweans, and which is commensurate to our organizational capacity as a country. And what I hear is a lot of metaphysics and pettiness instead of thinking big. I think big. That's why I saved the land reform by having the largest tobacco company in this country come and work with peasants and contract farming. And that's what saved the land reform. People talk pet little things about the little companies which Rhodesia, which inherited Rhodesia, and make them feel sacrosanct. We can't accept that. And I want to end up by saying, I didn't fight in the Rhodesian Bush War. I fought in the Chimurenga War, not Rhodesian Bush War. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Muchangwa, for that. So what I hear is the issue of regulations, regulatory authority, plugging the illicit financial flows that are happening. So what we're lacking is the policy. There's a gap that we need to cover in terms of regulating these issues, and it goes beyond just the stock exchanges, how we're doing business and how the private sector is operating in Zimbabwe and siphoning resources out of the country, either through the stock exchange, Zimbabwe Stock Exchange itself, but the new Victoria Falls Stock Exchange as well, and its potential as a tax haven. I think we've spoken to that as well. Dr. Fundanga, your 30-second final shot, parting shot.
Thank you very much. Let me say that at the center of everything is confidence, trust, the institutions that are created. I don't think an economy can just thrive because you are using US dollars. You have got to produce, whether you are using US dollars or you're using Zimdollars or Matopos, whatever you call them, you must produce to create wealth. It is that wealth which will make Zim prosperous. So I personally think that this issue of quasi-fiscal activities of the central bank and so forth is something which can easily be addressed. We all went through that. Me, I remember when I went to the Bank of Zambia, my work was already cut out because the general feeling was the central bank should get out of everything, including giving people traveling foreign exchange, said go and do these things at your own commercial banks, they will do them. Let the central bank concentrate on its core activities. So that helped quite a lot because we used to have things like what we call credit guarantee for small scale industries and all sorts of things which are happening even in Zimbabwe now. But you can easily clean up the central bank and say you will not do these things. And that will keep a lot of misfits from visiting the central bank because they want to be able anything to go and do there. But if all the activities concentrated there, then you have a problem. Even this foreign exchange allocation, I was talking about the interbank market. When you have the interbank market, trading is taking place in the banks. The settlements are taking place. It's T+2 or T+3, whatever settlement date is. You don't have to wait for somebody to start centrally allocating to those who are successful in the auction. And this is what keeps the central bank clean. I understand the currency board, but I think a lot of people have pointed out that can you control what it will do, how it will interface with others? All these come back to the question of discipline, the question of confidence, and so forth. So just having a high propensity for new institutions is not a solution. is doing things well that provides solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think this has been very clear in terms of where we have to go and what we need to build on. And I think they're very critical, solid, and clear recommendations to the government in terms of putting up a currency board, in terms of plugging illicit financial flows, in terms of building strong fiscal management, public finance management frameworks and system, and building on our policy and kickstarting our production. I think it is a conversation that can keep on going, but we need to understand it from the broader political economy perspective. And I think the issues that I would want to speak to before I hand over to you, Professor Mandaza, is that I think we have a crisis, and the crisis we have is bigger than just the currency crisis. We have a crisis of and in the state in terms of a predatory and rent-seeking kind of state, and maybe a weak state that hasn't put in place the policies, the regulations, and also moving and taking bold steps and clear steps in terms of addressing the current crisis. So we have remained in the rhetoric mode. We also have a crisis of the economic model that we have, and I think this is what Tinashe was sharing from independence. We've been going south. There's been volatility. If you're another economist or another commentator or political economist, you would look at all these issues from those perspectives, and what you see is that we have been in a crisis of an economic or a developmental model that is centered on the human being, that is centered on our environment, that is centered on our domestic homegrown economic solutions that we need to be looking at as we build on. So our crisis is more than the currency. It has then backed the lack of confidence, the lack of trust amongst the public because of the inconsistencies that we have seen in terms of the policy space. And I think Zambia has given an example here through Dr. Fundanga that people in Zambia, actually traders, sometimes prefer to have the kwacha. And I want to believe that in Zimbabwe, you could put the US dollar there, you could put a plain bond paper there, you could put the RTGS there. If there is confidence and trust, one can pick even a plain bond paper and know that I can buy, I can preserve the value. The issue is what that people are seeking for is value. It's not the US dollar per se, but it's the value. So how do we build that value is what we have had. We need transparency, we need accountability, which is why we need to put these structures in place, like the currency board, like the Financial Services Regulations Authority, overhaul or reforming of the central bank itself, in terms of how it has caused the monetary inconsistencies and the policy inconsistencies, and sometimes the fiscal inconsistencies that we have seen because of the quasi-fiscal activities that we have experienced in the past and continue to experience. So I think this has been a rich discussion with rich perspectives and also very forward-looking in terms of where we have to go. I look forward to us having a multi-issue, multi-stakeholder national dialogue process, which includes all the citizens, where we're going to look at these issues and facilitate it in a process, respectful process of perspective like we have had this evening. So I thank you very much, my esteemed panelists. I think there was so much respect. There was so much enriching conversations and submissions. And I hand over back to you, Professor Mandaza, for you to conclude for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Before I thank Janet and the panelists, just to point out some takeaways for this discussion, very rich discussion. It was one in which we were seeking policy solutions to a growing problem. The parallel rate today, I'm told, is something like 400 to 450, and it's galloping. It was 300 last week. Now it's 400, and it's galloping, as I said. Just 4 points I wanted to highlight. One was the need for the central bank to concentrate on core activities, and this point was made by Caleb Fundanga, who is also a member of the board of the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. And some of us hailed his appointment to that board, given his experience, and he has been very modest. In fact, it was during his era as governor that the Zambian kwacha was stabilized to the point where, as I said, I was in Zambia last week, and I didn't see a US dollar anywhere. And yes, Funanga and other colleagues took me out, and throughout it was the kwacha, strong kwacha. Number two, transparency in terms of managing receipts from exports. Comparisons were made with Kenya. In Kenya, there are no extractive industries, there's no mining at all. The currency is strong. The exports are mainly in hospitality, in tourism, and in horticulture. That money comes back. By comparison, Zimbabwe is dependent mainly on exports in the extractive industries, where there's hemorrhaging. That is, Chris, in my view, the main source of our problems, the extractive industries. You speak about the Chinese investment in Chivu and so on and so forth. I've said once before, why don't we have our Chinese friends, unlike the imperialists, come and establish their industries in every province, instead of carrying out the raw materials, our chrome and so on and so forth. Let's have beneficiation, as you said in our conversation earlier on during the day. Beneficiation, create value at home, and above all, manage our receipts from exports. Where are they going to? We are doing about some 6 to 7 billion a year in the extractive industries, the export of minerals. Where is it going? That will create value enough to buttress our currency. The currency board, again, people have raised questions about that, including yourself, Janet, whether we can really have a currency board. But the currency board is only important if we have the stable macroeconomic situation, which we don't have at the moment. So I'm afraid that we just touched the bare minimum in terms of our discussion. We have not concluded with any firm recommendations, recommendations that will cause government in particular, but the Reserve Bank also to take immediate steps to contain what is a growing crisis. And we don't want to get back where we were last time in 2006, 2008. But I want to thank Janet really for managing this panel and the discussion in the manner that you did, and to thank the panelists, the Chennai, Tinashe, for leading the discussion, Chris, and Caleb Fundaga. Thank you very much. Until the next occasion, goodbye.
Okay. Merci à tous.